George Williams, Vice-Chancellor of Western Sydney University, renowned for his opposition to the JRG, campaigning against the Job Ready Graduates scheme, also for his leadership in Western Sydney University, and for his choice of colourful socks. George, before we start, just tell me a little bit about your life. So let's start with where did you grow up?
And look, I grew up in lots of places, and my parents separated when I was quite young, so I spent a lot of time with a single mum, living in different accommodation. I came from what now would be regarded very much as a low SES background. There wasn't enough food to go around. And quite a large family as well. So, perhaps the story I'll tell that gives a sense of my own background and what connects me to my current job is the story of, my early childhood was very much, education wasn't for me. I spent a good time off the rails. I was absolutely the kid that no one wanted in their class. I've no doubt that in the classrooms or the teacher rooms, they would have said, I do not want George Williams in my class. I'll trade you 3 of those students to not get him in my class. I think I faced expulsion 4 times in primary school, from what I can remember. And, one of those key turning points in my life was actually when I was about 9 or 10, when I was facing yet another detention. And the teacher said, look, we both know that this is just such a regular occurrence. Let's just put you on permanent detention. So it doesn't matter what happens, we know you're going to have a detention every week. And my response is to say, that seems a bit unfair. I haven't actually done anything for the future weeks yet. I absolutely accepted that it was going to happen. But maybe it was my lawyer instincts coming out early. And what it turned out to be the case was that the teacher did put me on permanent detention every Thursday lunchtime in Year 5 in primary school. And that teacher spent an hour with me every Thursday lunchtime educating me, essentially, and saw something in me and basically constructed this detention in order to spend time with me. And that was absolutely a turning point in my life from having been off the rails, because suddenly I started to get self-esteem. I felt somebody believed in me. I actually started to enjoy learning. And for the first time I thought, well, maybe I can make something of myself. Maybe I can do something that matters. So that particular story is one that's really resonated with me, because in my current job, I just want every person to have the same opportunity. Great teachers, an opportunity to get ahead at life, no matter where you are, what your background is. I've had those wonderful opportunities, and I think a great education in Australia is inclusive, open, and has great teachers that change lives. So, that's a story, I suppose, that explains why I feel so privileged to be in my current role, because I can make a difference and make a difference for people in the same way that I experienced in my life.
I'm assuming that has significantly impacted your experience. As you say, it links to your current job. How has it... Is that a key inspiration behind your advocacy for JRG and other things?
It is, and I'd have to say I've had many great teachers in my life. I can point to uni teachers, all sorts. And, it's one of those things, if we think back to our lives, you often remember your family and your teachers, or at least I do. There's something about teachers that really stick in your mind and have a profound impact upon who you are. And advocacy for JRG and others, I think at its heart, education is about teachers and students, and designing a system where they're supported by a wonderful professional staff to get those excellent outcomes in a classroom. And I think at the moment in higher education, but also in high school and primary education, to be frank, there's a lot that's broken with the system. We can see basic problems. The fees at universities are one. It's just wrong. It's unfair that students will be paying $52,000 for a 3-year arts degree. 93% of the cost of their degree. Essentially, we've privatised arts education in Australia. And of course, that is the degree of choice for low SES, Indigenous, first in family, and other students. We are literally pricing the people out of the system who most need the mobility. But as much as I focus on higher education, the other forms are equally problematic. If you look at the decline in completion rates in Year 12, it's gone down by 10% in recent years. And that's a massive decline. We sort of think things get better in education in Australia, but 1 in 10 kids who would have finished high school no longer finish high school over the last 5 years or so. And that's particularly pronounced in boys. where we're seeing increasing numbers of young boys not finishing high school, not going to TAFE, not going to uni. And if you're concerned about the rise of right-wing extremism, you haven't seen nothing yet. If you look at the rising wave, increasingly so, of young boys and men without education, without good skills, who are increasingly becoming bitter and disaffected. So for me, I suppose I connect education to the sort of society we want to live in. It's the bedrock of a good society. And if you don't get those fundamentals right, there's no surprise there's big social consequences.
I want to share a couple of excerpts from an essay that George wrote last year, Aiming Higher, Universities in Australia's Future. It's
available at all good bookstores.
Available. It is worth a
Makes
worth
an
a
excellent
read.
Christmas present. Easter is whatever it is.
There's three key themes. So the first is university. Well, I've ascribed the themes. It's George's words, but the first
wasn't co-pilot that did it. Was really you,
No,
or just checking here?
Really me.
Okay, fair enough.
So universities must be better workplaces. Is the first part. He says we need to improve how we care for our people, which after all is the best way of ensuring they perform at their best. It's hard for academics to be great teachers or to plan their curriculum for the longer term, let alone to build a fulfilling career, if they don't know whether they'll be employed from one semester to the next. There are too many examples of universities letting their staff down, whether it be through underpaying salaries or over-relying on insecure work. Now, just stop there and just let that sit for a moment. But this is a pretty significant thing. George, you've been a VC for 2 years?
Nearly.
And so to write something which is very honest about where the sector is at, was that hard?
Look, not really, because I think it's sort of blindingly obvious as well that if you have any industry that's got such high levels of insecure work casualisation, there's going to be an impact upon people. And I worked as a casual academic myself for a period of time, so I absolutely understand the impacts upon people. And if you have people doing that for very long periods of time, it affects their families, their security and the like. And I personally think as leaders, but as a sector, we should call out the problems. And if we don't tend to fix them. You've got to call attention to them and actually act. And I think a lot of the things I've been saying, frankly, are just common sense, and a lot of there's no particular insight in those. It's really describing the problem so we can actually move to the solution phase. And that's what we must do, because I do very strongly believe that, again, the bedrock of a good education system are its people. If we're not looking after our teachers, our professional staff, then how would we expect they would be getting great outcomes for students?
So change management, you've gone through a round of that already. I know, we had some conversations after that time. It's a challenging process for everyone involved, clearly, particularly those who are facing losing their jobs. What's your views on change management, not just as a VC, but overall? What if you had three things that we could do better, what would they be?
Yeah, and I mean, one thing I've learnt in my career is how critical change management and good people function is. And I'm not an expert in those areas, but particularly when we went through our big reset process last year, it was absolutely vital to help us support our people, make some really tough decisions. It was a brutal, awful period, a lot of that period, dealing with the financial problems we had as a university, but we also needed to change. We needed to adapt and change our structures, our roles. We had many people in dead-end jobs. Our professional staff had no mobility. We weren't focused on the main game of supporting students. We had to have a large set of changes that we went through. And the decision we made, and one of the lessons was we would not employ a major consulting firm to do it. That was a big decision, and I suppose that's one of the lessons, and I'm really proud that we didn't. We were better for it. I've seen and have worked with excellent consultants, but I often feel that the big firms are almost about outsourcing leadership in these areas. You can almost pass the buck a bit. The buck absolutely rested with me for the decisions last year, and we got our A-team together from across the university who loved the university, who had deep knowledge. We devolved decision making within a very clear set of guardrails, how much we needed to save, what we needed to do. And the lesson was out of that actually, we made mistakes without a doubt, and I'm happy to acknowledge, even talk about those mistakes, but we were better for doing it that way because we had more granular decision making. And what we also had was we had higher buy-in from people as well. And they felt that someone connected to them at a managerial level who knew the problems, was making decisions about cuts, changes, and that form of change management with a really good expert team was as successful as it could have been for a brutal and awful process. And in our case, it meant that we were able to save about $80 million in 6 months, and we're through the process. It was done. We worked with our union. And here also another lesson for me is met with the union very, very regularly. At my evidence at the New South Wales inquiry into unis last year, I started by thanking the NTU and the CPSU. And I can point to some key areas where their advocacy and scepticism changed my mind, and we made better decisions that looked after people better as a result of that. So,
did you inherit that environment from Barney Glover being there before you, and he forged some relationships with the union?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I would absolutely credit Barney with that we already had a positive relationship with our unions. But gee, that doesn't also count for much in the climate in which we live. You look at how quickly that's fraying in other universities, and just for some extent for good reason too. That, I accept, as we heard Damien earlier, there are systemic problems within the sector, unpaid wages, governance and the like, that, I can disagree on some, but I think there are real problems here to solve. So I think acknowledgement of that, but I think at my end, but also our leadership team, also some humility in this area is really important, to say we're going through a really tough process quickly, pulling off a band-aid. We're not likely to get everything right, so often the best person to listen to in the middle of a process is the most sceptical person. At the very least, they'll make you rethink. It's challenging, uncomfortable, and in my case also it meant ringing a lot of people during the process who were most impacted and listening to their stories, and are really emotional and difficult, but that connects you and grounds you in a way that you get a better sense of the impacts upon people, and I think you make better decisions as a result.
I think you're part of a new vanguard of leaders in the sector who are showing humility and the ability to listen, and the results from that. What do you do when you have someone in your team or someone who wants a job in your team if they don't have those traits?
Well, and I acknowledge Sarah Lewis, who's here as one of our executive deans, who's in my team, who has got these traits. So we've got really good people in our team. But I think it's about the culture you form. It's about leading by example, I think, is really important.
But if they're in the job interview and they're not appearing to be on board,
I think in bringing people in, if they don't have those qualities, they're not employable in those roles. It's as simple as that. I think in our leadership team and at Western, we really adhere to the idea of leading with purpose. That connects people strongly to what we do. 2/3 of our students are first in family. We are the uni of social mobility, the largest number of low SES students in the country. So if you're not connecting to that purpose and living it, you're not right for Western. And
is that on your job descriptions?
Yeah, I think I was actually looking at one this morning, and yes, it's something we are explicit about. Amongst other things as well, leading with purpose, agility, the ability to make hard decisions in a changing environment. There are a lot of things we need to do, and I think part of it is recognising that even our leadership team, we're in a community of leaders, is how I put it. We've got such brilliant people across our university, being open across the spectrum, all of us as leaders, to new ideas, and actually often finding that someone who's at the coalface, frankly, has got a better idea. And in my case, I try and spend a day a week just visiting teams across all of our campuses. We've got 9 of them, so there's a bit of travel, and then there's the internationals. So I'll just go there and spend time talking to people literally who's answering the phones and say, what's your job like? I might spend an hour sitting with them, watching what they do, listening. And I've learned so much from that. Of broken systems, we have great people who are trapped in jobs where the systems are letting them down. And again, that's a form of leadership. I think it's empowering them in a sense, and then I'll go back, we'll take notes and say, how do we build this in? How do we actually build this into a change agenda that is driven from the grassroots of committed great people who, like much of the sector, are trapped in legacy systems that represent the best the 1990s had to offer? Or in our case, we actually found one system from the 1970s that was still in place. Heaven knows how. And of course, those systems don't speak to each other. So we have so many people in universities whose job is computer says no. But you don't get that unless you sit with those people, understand, and the same with students. Just spending time, I think, and that's something I encourage all of our leaders to do regularly.
We've had some discussions this morning and yesterday about the relevance of current job descriptions and promotional structures? Are we stuck with a 20th, 19th, 18th, 17th century academic job description and promotion structure? And likewise, Hugh levels, are they outdated? We've had lots of evidence, so you'd probably want to say yes.
Yes. Thanks for the leading question. And I think we all know that. The question with some of these things is, what are the most urgent priorities? There are so many things that aren't right, and this is a good example. Is this urgent enough to focus upon? And in the main, for me, there are certainly aspects I'd focus on, but it's not where I put most of my energy. It's too difficult. The cost of actually changing some of this is too hard at the moment, given the industrial system, the challenges of moving forward. So my energy is going into the more systems, the student-facing, the teaching models, AI. And it's also, I think, a matter, Tim, of how we work within those structures to really democratise universities. So for me, I'm really excited that we'll be rolling out Copilot, Enterprise Copilot, to all of our staff. And what we're doing with that is essentially devolving the development of agents, a lot of the work, and really giving people recognition wherever they are in the organisation, whatever their Hugh level, their academic level, calling it out, supporting them, celebrating them. And that's something that democratises, I think, in a really effective way, if we can get that right. The other thing I've done, which is a bit different, is I've got one role. Essentially, this particular person is my chief disruptor. So I've got one person whose job is to make us uncomfortable and to come up with, tell us we're going too slow, what we need to do. Someone who leads some of our entrepreneurial functions. I've expanded the portfolio. They now cut across teaching, learning, and other areas. And their job is, doesn't matter what their Hugh classification is, but essentially, they're our chief internal disruptor, and I tell them if they're not causing us grief, they're not trying hard enough. And it causes a lot of tension within the organisation sometimes, but we need the internal tension. And so for me, those are the things that enable us to work within a structure without me putting a lot of energy in a fight I'm not sure I would win in the short term.
It's a perfect segue, really, to the question from the previous session about AI. So AI is an existential threat to the value proposition of universities, is what Damien said in the last session. What do you think about that?
Look, he's absolutely right. And I think he's absolutely right as well in that we need to better identify our value proposition. I think it's clear that many people in our community don't know what that is, and would rightly say, let's just do something online. And the more we go down that online path and make it the predominant experience in some programs, well, to be frank, why would you go to a university? Go and get yourself a Coursera certificate, a Google certificate, $59 a month, good job prospects at the end of it. They've already rolled out a few million of those. And for me, the existential threat is actually from non-university actors, the Netflix of higher education. It's only a matter of time before we see bigger rollout of global degrees through platforms and the like. And big opportunities. And having spoken to the companies, Microsoft, Google, Amazon and the like, when I meet with them, they say the two biggest industries ripe for disruption are health and higher education. And they're looking for that killer opportunity to roll out a higher education product, as they call it, to corporatise it, monetise it, that can be done by any student in any country. So that's where it's heading. So what's our value proposition? Well, I think our value proposition is that there's something special about an educational experience engaging with people in a classroom. That actually means that you network, you learn, you develop as a person. You cannot replicate that online. In fact, online is a really pale shadow of teaching in a university at its best. So that's, for me, come to university and get a life experience that'll set you up with the skills for life, the relationships with life, the growth for life. That's what we need to lean into. But as a sector, we're not in a good place on this, where increasingly convenience and flexibility trumps good learning, including at Western. This is a challenge for me as well. So how do we reset to say that actually there's something important, and even though you want maximum convenience and flexibility, there's something fundamental and valuable in being in a classroom and connecting with people, particularly for first in family and the sort of students we have. But the more the online we go, the more I worry that actually other competitors will do it better and cheaper. And we're already seeing that emerging.
So is that going to kill off online learning for universities? And if so, with your crystal ball, how fast?
I mean, I think it's already killing off some of the micro-credentialing and short course material. And again, I mean, we can't compete with $59 a month with Coursera for a Google certificate in certain programs. So you can already see large parts of the market are inaccessible to universities given our cost structures and the fact we don't have the really slick platforms that you need to really do the work in these areas. So that's what we are seeing. There's still business-to-business micro-credentials. There are good areas, but the high volume, low cost, we can't effectively compete in, except as the suppliers of content. And that'll be driven where they will get the cheapest content provided by whatever university is going to provide it. I think the next bit, we will see more online. I mean, there are good competitors there. OES, there are good companies there. I think, and we haven't yet seen the rollout of the online global products that we may see. But when we do, again, cost will be a big factor. And I'm railing about $52,000 arts degrees when people may say, we'll give you a 1, 2 or 3 year program for a few $100s a year. Fundamentally different. And again, if the value proposition is not compelling, why would you choose that uni degree with the massive debt when you can get something from a globally recognised multinational with a job pathway at the end of it? That's what they're offering. Very high employment rates on the back of certificates. So that for me is the challenge, and really one I'm very focused on is how do we change, how do we adapt in what will be an increasingly challenging competitive environment for universities on a global scale, just as we've seen across multiple other industries over past decades.
Something that strikes me as I'm listening to you is how do you manage the tension with staff? Because you've talked about, I can see the positive benefits of disruption. I can see that you're across a range of different issues that are ahead. We're in the middle of a time of great change. How do you manage anxiety for staff while also talking about that?
Well, and I think the first thing to say is our staff can see this too. Our staff can see the impacts of generative AI. Our teachers can see the essays coming through that are full of AI slop. Our workforce can see this, so it's not as if there's a lot of convincing about the big changes that are underway. The real challenge, I think, is to engage, listen, and I think a lot of empathy and kindness is critical at a time like this to understand the impacts upon people, reassurance, and that's, I suppose, the big issue about leadership in this area. It's about having a really clear, positive, meaningful vision that connects to people's sense of purpose, and then what's really important in our sector is the capacity to deliver it. And that's often where the sector has fallen down, I think, is delivering transformational change, bringing people along and doing so at scale with success, and at the moment in a constrained time period with limited finances. I mean, that's really our challenge at Western. How do we do all those sort of things? How do we transform in that sort of environment? But I think, Tim, when I talk to our people, and again, the key is just talking to people all the time, visiting, listening, connecting. If you do that in the right way, then change fatigue can become excitement, that we can be on the cusp of doing something important. And as I say to our staff, that this will be done to us or we will lead the way. And if we lead the way, instead of big corporates, we'll be focused on public purpose, benefits for our community, and you're going to be part of something special and important. That, at Western, what we're trying to do is really redefine what a university will be over the next 10 to 15 years, and better a university like us and others like represented here do than a major multinational. So lean into the public purpose and value and the connection to staff.
Which creates a sales problem, if you like, in the crudest form, where we have a social licence issue, which has been well documented in the sector. The reputation of universities has gone down, but you're asking community to redefine their thought of a university. Does that mean we've got to spend more on marketing?
Not necessarily. And look, it's not just a big sales problem, it's a big demand problem. If you look at the figures, the number of students, Australian students who went to university in 2015 is basically the same as it is at the moment. So it's been a stagnant market for about a decade in Australia, despite big population growth. So that should lead us to ask some pretty big questions. Why is it the population is going up and fewer people are going to university in terms of percentage? And part of the answer is fewer are finishing high school, so we need to lean into high school and the like. Part of the answer is boys in particular are dropping out in much larger numbers, and 62% of all uni students are female, 38% are male. now. That's a massive gap, nearly a 25% gap between men and women in universities. So you've got to lean into the demand side as much as the other side. And I think, at least in our case, the days of massive marketing budgets are over. That's not something we can afford to do. I think also I'm a little dubious about just how effective some of those things are. I mean, branding and marketing in the sector is pretty homogenous. I don't know how many taglines have got future in there somewhere. And when I speak to students, high school students and the like, they struggle to differentiate. It's a really homogenous market. So purpose, clarity, differentiation, they're all critical. But if you don't do that, then you can't. I mean, marketing doesn't make much of a difference. It's sort of adding a layer onto something where the substance isn't there. And I think the final thing I'd say is I'm always one for, not the traditional marketing, but how we will launch a new brand ourselves. We're not replacing the big W at Western, but we'll change a tagline and the like. So my instructions to the team are, how can we get good visibility without spending anything? Do I have to do a stunt? What do we have to do? How do we get attention? And my challenge to them is, how can you get me on breakfast television talking about our branding without spending anything? What do we need to do for that to happen? And we'll see. We'll see how they go.
Could you do that if you were a Sandstone? So say you took over, Sydney or UNSW tomorrow. Could you have the same approach, or is a different level of gravitas required for different universities?
Look, I think the sense of gravitas is, of course, completely self-constructed in any way. And I think, and for me, I think university is about serving students and communities. It doesn't matter whether you're a GO8 or now in the biggest group in the sector, the 2050 Alliance. It doesn't matter which group you are. In the end, it's connection to purpose. And I think this is part of the problem with this sector, is we're too much caught up in prestige, gravitas and the like, as opposed to what are we here for? And how do we measure our success? And that's pretty fundamental, enduring and consistent. And I think there's a lot of room in a sector that's riven by issues of social licence for humour, humility, connection, and showing that we get where people are coming from. So I think if we can do that, it's a bit like the TikTok and other things I do, where I've spent a large part of my time as a Vice-Chancellor being humiliated on social media. And look, it is pretty embarrassing, but it works. And it sends a message to our students. And in fact, in my daughter, who's 15, 16, she's my main social media expert. She originally told me, don't do any of this, Dad, it's too embarrassing. She boycotted TikTok for a significant period of time on the basis I came up on her feed, and that was highly distressing. I would actually say to any parent, just go on social media, you'll get your kids off quick smart. I went to Instagram, I followed her feeds. I've actually said to the government, you do not need a social media ban for under 16s, just get parents on social media. But at the end of it, where my daughter came to us, she said, look, Dad, you're completely lame, you're a try-hard, but it shows you care. And when I go around at lunchtime, I talk to students and the like at lunchtime, they will literally come up and they will say, you're that guy on TikTok, and have a bit of a chat. And the next question often is, what do you do here? And that's fine, but it works. And one of our big success stories that others could look at is actually we do TikTok or Instagram live sessions every quarter. And we get, I did one a couple of weeks ago, we got over 2,000 students live on that. Really raw, direct questions, parking, food, loneliness, devices. And so just being there, whatever comes, being prepared to engage. I mean, in terms of branding and marketing, it doesn't cost us a cent, but every quarter, 2,000 students, powerful word of mouth, and a sense that we're a uni that listens directly from the highest levels to students. And to be frank, if you're not on social media, you're not where your students are. That's what I learned. I didn't know that coming in, but I learnt that. And so you've just got to be where your audience, your students are. That's what we have to do.
Could you please change the plate on your door to that TikTok guy rather than Vice-Chancellor and see how that rolls? Even for a day. I'd like to, just one more question before we go to questions from the audience. We've got strict rules on AI for students. It's a bit of a wild west for staff. Does this keep you up at night?
Look, to tell you the truth, I wish we had strict rules for students. I wish we could even have strict rules for students. I think we have to be honest and say this is an incremental process. The technology is changing quickly. It's largely undetectable. And if we have a rule-based system for students based upon AI, the odds are we're missing the point. That a lot of it actually is about fundamentally changing how we assess, how we teach, how we engage, because we can't put rules in and think they're effective in these areas. They're not a lot of the time, but we can change how we interact. And when it comes to staff, we're obviously in the midst of a complete rethinking of much of academic work and also a professional staff work. And you can see, the challenge that Kath Ellis, our Pro-Vice-Chancellor, had a couple of weeks ago, where she wrote a piece for the Sydney Morning Herald. She used AI. She do that all the time. We encourage our staff, but the old media said you can't use AI for writing anything, but look, get with the times. This is how people generate content these days. So we are all working through this. And for me, it's less about rules and more about how we navigate through incremental change. And critically for a university, how do we shape and help chart that change in ethical ways that are consistent with public purpose? But it's like holding on the tail of a tiger. It is so fast and so difficult, but we've got to be realistic that in no moment of time are we likely to be in control of it. It's how we navigate this ongoing situation.
Fantastic. Do we have questions from anybody? You've stunned them into silence, George.
Hi, thank you. That was very entertaining.
I'm the light entertainment. That was my instructions.
I've got a specific question relating to the head of school role. They balance a lot, in my understanding. Do you have a perspective on how you can help develop them in terms of their leadership profile? They're kind of running mini businesses. They're also academic experts. They're also managing peers. Do you have a perspective on how you balance all of that?
Yeah, and I've been a dean and worked with many heads of school, and I've previously described heads of school roles as the hardest roles in a university. And I really mean that, because you get the intersection of all the things you're talking about. It's where a lot of the crippling compliance burden also comes in. It's also at that level where people are often coming to head of school roles without much prior training. If you survive that, you're ready to be a dean. But head of school, you're often coming directly from an academic career into that. And then suddenly you're dealing with a significant managerial position and also dealing with the really difficult people issues that arise there. So I think there's the intersection of all of those things. When I've engaged with this area in the past, I've said, well, a good point would be to train these people. Seriously, that often doesn't happen at all. And so it's sort of on-the-job training for many people, which is, a bit like putting someone into an impossible position and saying, go for it. So I think training. I think the other bit is strong communities for heads of school are critical. Regular engagement with heads of school across a university, because very often you need a peer to share the difficult things you're doing and that you're engaging with. Again, that can often be missing in those areas. And I think the heads of schools also need really good regular feedback as well, because I've seen many and talked to many, and there's often a sense of isolation and, just like deer in the headlights. So I don't think there's anything, in terms of, if you like, the people management, there's nothing surprising about any of these things. It's just that heads of schools often, there's an assumption they're ready and they'll do it, but it's not true. It's not true. And of course, unsurprisingly not true. But if you put those things in place, I've seen people being really successful with the supporting architecture.
Focused academics and whether your casualisation of teaching has changed.
Yeah, so the question's about teaching focused academics, and the first thing we did was we had a sector leading program where we had decasualisation, and I give my predecessor credit. It was a partnership with the NTU, and we converted 160 casual academics into ongoing academic staff. And very successful, and interestingly a far higher proportion of women, Indigenous and other groups came through that, because very often the people most likely to be casuals are people from those sorts of backgrounds. So 160 people got converted, and when I've met many of them and went to their events, and the gratitude and joy at having an ongoing job is profound, absolutely profound. You know, I met one person at one of these who said, finally I can contemplate having children. Another person said, I finally feel as if I can be a good teacher because I can prepare for the next couple of years as opposed to thinking I may never teach this again. So I can prepare for the longer term for my students. So that 160 staff has been fundamental, positive, and something we're very proud of. The teaching focused aspect of that, we don't have teaching focused positions. I've said to the union I would like to have teaching focused positions because we have a lot of staff who would prefer to focus on teaching. I'm in favour of it being a choice of staff, so not pushing someone down that area. We've just moved to a 40-40-20 workload model, which is great for our staff, but as I've said to the unions and others, well, what do we do with the teacher who doesn't want to do 40% research? Are we going to tell that person they don't have a job at the university? Because, you know, accountability, it's got to be there. You've got to deliver on the 40% component of your job. And so I think watch this space to see where we get to, but I would like to have those people having a choice to say they can do less than 40 or go to zero research. But it would be in recognition of their great teaching. That's the career they want to build. You've got to be promotable to level E. And there are unis that have been very successful. I recall my prior job at UNSW, very successful in this area in building this, and a good model. And I'd like to see Western have that option for our staff.
George, we're pretty much out of time. It's been a really great conversation. I'm just curious, from a personal point of view, how do you look after yourself, and when was the last time you had a complete day off?
A complete day off? And that would be Christmas, I think it would have been over that sort of period. And when I take my Christmas leave, that is complete time off. I absolutely need it. But I mean, these jobs can be a real grind. There's no doubt about that. But I tell you what, it's a real grind sitting answering phones from students too. And I feel really privileged with the job that I have and very energised and motivated. I feel very lucky with where I am. But I think the thing I've learnt, Tim, in terms of looking after myself, if I don't do that, I can't look after others. Last year was really brutal and hard. I think, you know, I actually said to my staff that there were times last year where I wasn't okay, where, you know, my mental health was impacted by what we went through, by speaking to people who were losing their jobs or voluntary redundancies, but nonetheless really impacted. And I said to my staff that the number of people who came up to me and said, "Are you okay?" was really powerful for me, because I feel if they're looking after me, they're looking after each other. This year, I've learned from that, and I'm prioritising more time for myself. So every morning throughout winter, I'll go for a swim, do something at the gym, do something just physical. If I do that, I'm in a better place. And I've got to be really rigorous about things like the things that matter to me. I'll never miss my daughter's soccer game. Doesn't matter what it is, I'll always be there. And for a 15-year-old daughter, you've got to have those points of connection. So I have things in my life that I think I've learnt that if I can do two things well in this job. I can do my job well and my family. Those are the two things, and that's okay. I'm comfortable with that, and a bit of exercise and the like. So I think I'm in a better place this year than I was last year, and but I think it's a good thing to talk about because a lot of people are just being run into the ground in our sector at the moment, at all levels, all parts of our organisations, and we have to prioritise wellbeing and care.
Thanks very much, George. It's fantastic.